Kia ora, and welcome to this episode of Shared Lunch, where we focus on Money Month, which is run by Sorted New Zealand. The theme this year is to pause and quite literally get your money sorted. So we thought we'd discuss something familiar to many, and that's you've managed to get on the property ladder, but now what? How do you stop yourself from going backwards or standing still and grow your wealth for the future? I'm Helen Mattison, and to help us with this conundrum, I'm joined by financial strategist and coach, the founder of Enable Me, Hannah McQueen. Hi Hannah, lovely to have you in the studio. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Hannah, it's harder than ever to buy a house, it seems, at the moment. And I think you recognise this, that times have actually changed when you decided to, I think, republish or update your book, Kill Your Mortgage and Sort Your Retirement. So let's start with what's different today than perhaps a couple of decades ago.
Ultimately, a couple of decades ago, provided you weren't bad with money, you were going to be okay in the end. So the conditions were favourable enough that you could almost drift towards financial success and being able to retire comfortably. As long as you lived within your means, as long as you delayed your gratification, you were going to be okay. And that was largely because the house prices to income prices were a lot closer than what they are today. So in my granddad's day, let's say he bought a house and let's say he earned $50,000, the house cost $100,000, hypothetically. So what that meant is that it was a lot easier to save a deposit because he didn't have to save as much of his income to come up with the deposit, which meant he could get onto the housing ladder very early. He was able to have a very moderate mortgage. He could become mortgage free within 10 years, provided he wasn't bad, just being average. And then because he was mortgage free in 10 years, he then had 35 years to save for his retirement. So that was his condition. So then you go to my parents' day where instead of it being a 1-to-2 ratio, it's a 1-to-4, or to my day where it's a 1-to-6 ratio. So house prices are now 6 times the average income of someone. And practically that means that you need to save a lot, which means you need to get the deposit, which means it takes you longer to save. Your mortgage is fatter, which takes longer to pay off. And if you're lucky and you're good with money, you may be mortgage free by retirement, but that assumes that you will not upgrade your home or help your kids onto the property ladder or do anything kind of moderately exciting. That under those conditions you might be okay, but less than 40% of Kiwis are on track to do that. And so I guess ultimately that big ratio has changed, which sort of has made it very difficult in other areas. But in addition to that, compared to my granddad's day, we've now got consumer debt, so short-term debt. Like credit cards weren't even a thing back then. You couldn't even use a credit card. So now we can. Now we can buy things, pay for them later. We can buy things. Like we've just got so much choice. Not only were there no credit cards back then, but there were no cafes. So all these things that we enjoy and want to be able to enjoy and maybe should rightly be able to enjoy, it's making it easier to spend when the conditions are worse. So at the very time, because normally when things are harder, you come at that by saying, okay, well, I'm going to be better. But if we look at these generations that I'm surrounded with, conditions are harder, but at the same time we are worse. And that's something that needs to quite seriously be addressed. Otherwise, we're going to have people who either don't believe they'll get onto the property ladder, which is really concerning for young people, or aren't going to be able to retire safely, which has a lot of impact in other areas as well.
So while everyone's situation is different, is it fair to say that given that environment, what you've just explained, people are probably feeling a bit stuck? There's a bit of fog around what they should be doing financially to be smarter and to get ahead?
Yeah, well, I think people think that I'm not bad with money, therefore there can't be any obvious areas I can improve, therefore there's no point sort of going through that process of refinement. That seems to be the gist. And And I think it's because they don't immediately see where their inefficiencies are, because a lot of them are more technical inefficiencies, structural, to do with how they structure their mortgage and their KiwiSavers, their insurances, their tax, how their money flows. Like that, actually, those are specialist areas. So most people don't even know what they need to know to do it better. So they just think, well, it feels about right, therefore it will be. And then the other half is most people don't know how to save successfully. They don't know what their target should be for savings. And so then all that we do is we think, okay, well, for success, I just need to earn more money. If I just earn more money, I'm going to be okay. But what happens is, as you earn more money, all that happens is that you get this lifestyle creep. You just spend a little bit more, and you feel okay about that because you're earning more money. But it translates to this really dangerous outcome of you're working hard and you're going nowhere, or you're not getting ahead at the rate that you should, indicative of your income. Because I think we do accept that the poor will always be poor and the rich will always be rich, but it is the strength of that middle class who kind of don't identify as being super rich but earn pretty good income. When they're not getting ahead, that is a problem that really needs to be addressed.
So if you're in that situation and you are feeling quite stuck and you're not really sure what to do, what's the starting point?
Yeah, well, it's almost like you've got to hop on the scales, right? Which is horrific. I had a look. From a weight loss perspective, that's the worst part of any journey, when you've got to get on those scales. But we've got to take stock of where you're at. We need to understand what you're aiming for. And most people don't even know how to set financial goals. They don't even know what they should be aiming for. So again, they default to, well, I'll just won't be bad. But we need to understand where you are, what you're trying to aim for, what you're actually progressing at. Like, there's no point having a goal unless you're tracking to it or understand your trajectory. And then we need to work out, and can we do it better? And for most of my clients, we can normally improve their savings rate by 300%. Like, it's insane. Really? And these people are financially literate people. They earn good income. They're managing budgets in their day job. But on a personal basis, we often need a plan and structure and some accountability if we're going to stick to it.
Are there also things that you can do that more short term, say like having an emergency fund, and then there's the longer term things, thinking perhaps about your contributions to KiwiSaver, for example?
Yes, you can, but those are sort of more tactical things, right? Like, it's not going to move the boat out any faster. And like, yes, I want you to be in the right KiwiSaver fund, contributing the right amount with the right provider. Of course I want that. That's sort of an inefficiency for most of us. But that in isolation is still not going to get your mortgage paid off faster. And nor is it going to position you so you can help your kids onto the property ladder, or whatever your goal is for you. And I think that's where people get sometimes fixated on the things that won't actually change the dial. And because the things that change the dial, right, those are harder to unlock because it's often linked to behavioural change. And that can be tricky for some people, especially when you overlay relationships. But I think back to kind of what are the things that you can do, as part of taking stock of where you're at, you have to understand who you are and how you work with money, because that will determine what strategy is going to be effective for you. Because if you are a saver, someone who naturally enjoys saving, which I can't relate to that at all because I'm a shopper, but they naturally enjoy doing that. How we would set a strategy for that person is very different to how we engage a natural spender. And neither of them are good nor bad. Like, please don't attribute emotion to money, but depending on what you are, there is a different way that we need to combat or play to that strength, if it is a strength. And I think that's where some people come unstuck. They're not self-aware with their own money tendencies, their money beliefs that they tell themselves. All these things have more of an impact around what you're likely to achieve rather than your income level.
But also, I suppose, often you buy a house that's a pretty large asset with someone else. You might have quite different money behaviours, and that probably is something you'd probably have to navigate. I mean, you must see couples in this situation all the time.
Yes. Sometimes I think I'm more of a relationship counsellor than a financial advisor. Yes, I think you've got the coupling, right? Like if you're a spender, married to a spender, you're looking good, you're having a good time, you're probably going nowhere, but boy, you fun. And then you've got the saver married to the saver, which are just sort of tight, which is helpful, I guess. And then you've got that combo where you could be a spender and a saver, and that can be quite fraught. And I think when you first get together, it's probably cute and interesting and you're curious as to how they work with money and all of those things. But after a few years, it's quite tiresome for everyone because the spender feels bad about spending and the saver's not making any progress, and you don't understand why the other person is how they are. And it creates friction. Not necessarily arguments. The friction could be dealt with by not talking about it. Like friction doesn't have to be explosive, but that friction, if we go back to the science of propulsion, that friction, that disconnect slows down your ability to get ahead. And I do think it's, many of my clients, half my clients are that opposite attracts financially, and so we've got to learn, well, how can we navigate that when you both have you've had different upbringings around money, you see money differently, you spend differently, you're motivated by different things. How do we navigate that successfully so that you still like each other and obviously you still like me? So those are things that we take care to do, and I think it helps that I'm independent and qualified to comment on these things, because there's a lot of emotion that comes to these meetings. There's frustration, there's hurt, sometimes there's guilt, and you have to be able to work through that in a really constructive way, which is interesting because one of the most common pieces of feedback I get from clients is, I wish I'd found you 10 years ago. I'm sleeping better, and I can't believe you got away with saying that to my spouse. Right? Like sometimes you've got to just hear it from the right person for it to be taken on board. So like if I'm wanting to get fit, my husband's fit, and I could take advice from him, perhaps. I am not interested in receiving helpful suggestions. And so even if he would say something that my personal trainer would say to me, the exact same thing, and without emotion, like it wouldn't be like a jab, it would be really constructive and kind. I'm just not inclined to engage with his feedback, but I will my personal trainer. And I think back to that self-awareness, kind of taking the pulse of where you're at financially, understanding yourself, who you need to hear the information from so you actually take it on board is very helpful.
I'm in that spender-saver relationship, marriage, if you like, and I totally concur with what you're saying. I could talk about it all day, but we won't. One thing I wanted to talk about, though, was how much of a difference does it make with restructuring or structuring your mortgage? I mean, quite often New Zealanders, I think most commonly fix for 2 years and pretty much leave it, and everything's being paid off at the same time. What do you say to that?
Well, structuring your mortgage is important, and you're trying to balance a few things. So you want certainty, I guess, for a period of time, and the fixed interest rate gives you that certainty, but you also want the ability to pay off the debt without being penalised, because you do need to pay it off faster, and you want the flexibility of being able to re-access that money as well. So you're trying to balance those things. Before you can work out how to structure it, we have to first maximise your cash surplus. So if you're not saving at the moment, that suggests you don't have a cash surplus, and most people you'll sort of be able to identify whether you think you're sinking, floating, or flying somewhere along there around that spectrum. So we need to first determine, is there money left over that we could put towards paying the mortgage off faster? If the answer is yes, great, that makes you better than most. The next question is, how do I maximise that? And once I've maximised it, then I'll work out how I need to structure the mortgage. If your situation, though, is that you don't have much money left over, you're kind of living paycheck to paycheck, most likely paycheck to paycheck, but there isn't much growing out the side, perhaps beyond your KiwiSaver, well, then we've got to take a different approach, because we have to try and stabilise your position. If you're already flying, saving a lot, again, we still want to maximise it, but we're trying to fly you to your destination faster. So depending on where you're at, we want to first kind of squeeze out all the inefficiencies and try and get you. So we've got a plan to lift your savings rate to 20% of your income. And not everyone can get there. Like for some of my clients, it has taken us more than a year to get to that level. And it's a combination of costs coming down and also working on strategies to lift income so that we do have that money left over. But that's the first thing that we're trying to do. And then we work out how to structure the mortgage. Now, typically, if I was to put numbers around this, if your surplus, the money left over, could be increased to $50,000 a year, I'm just plucking a number, then I would link that into how I structure your mortgage. I would have a revolving credit facility that you don't have FPOS access to, so it's not a transactional account, but it would be $50,000 overdrawn. And the objective is going to be to pay that off over the course of the year. Again, you don't have FPOS access to that, but that becomes, I guess, the propulsion to try and grow wealth when we move to the next stage. But I've got to get you mortgage free first. Well, as part of know how quickly I can get you mortgage free before I overlay the wealth strategy.
But there's a balancing act though, isn't it? Because we often get the question, should I be paying off my mortgage or should I be contributing to KiwiSaver? And obviously you should be contributing to KiwiSaver, but then it's how much and what's my emphasis?
Yeah, so as a general rule, you contribute to KiwiSaver if you're not in financial hardship, and you contribute up to the level that your employer matches. If you're self-employed, there isn't that much of an incentive to contribute beyond what the government will unlock their tax credit for you. But let's say it's 3%. So if you had money outside of that, then the question is, well, what do I do with it? Well, yes, you could put it into KiwiSaver, and I guess that's a form of compulsory saving, but that is assuming that you haven't purchased your first home, I guess, and you don't need that money for retirement. I guess it protects it, it locks it in a vault for you. But for most of us, certainly the clients that I'm working with, I can put that money to work a lot faster and a lot harder than if it was left in a KiwiSaver fund. So contributing up to the level your employer matches, absolutely could put that into KiwiSaver. It's the extra contribution that I'm wary of, because if I can put that money towards paying your mortgage off faster, not only are we creating flexibility and financial resilience now that you can benefit, but we're creating equity in your property as well that we could recycle as a deposit for an investment property. And so then you've got kind of 3 layers working hard for you. You've got this greater cash surplus, which increases your resilience, which means you can weather storms more comfortably. We've got your mortgage coming down, which is saving you interest costs, getting you mortgage free faster, and also creating equity in your home. And then we're tapping into that equity as a deposit for an investment property. Those 3 things will outperform any KiwiSaver investment kind of any day of the week, any extra KiwiSaver investment beyond what your employer matches.
But the beauty of compound interest, obviously you need to be contributing something though, so that you can take advantage of time.
Yes, but I do think that the benefit of KiwiSaver isn't really the compound interest and it isn't really time. It's the fact that your employer is contributing. So you're getting 100% return. That is the beautiful thing. The actual fund that you're investing in after inflation and some of those things might actually give quite a poor return, but getting access to that employer money is the golden ticket for KiwiSaver. So yes, having it locked up so you can't touch it is also helpful because you don't inadvertently fritter it away. But it's more that it's just locked up for a long period of time rather than the base performance of the fund, which is where I guess that compounding concept comes in.
What about trying to be smart with your money? And I mean, there's other options, there's shares, there's savings accounts, better deals on your insurance, things like that. I mean, all of them probably have a part to play, but if you weren't just focused on your mortgage and you had other investments and you're quite diversified, what do you think then? What could people be doing?
Well, I think it comes back to kind of the principles of wealth creation, where you want your money to work as hard as it can for the kind of balance of risk or volatility. So if we look at a mortgage, let's say the average mortgage rate, the 3-year mortgage rate at the moment is 6.35%. So if you've got an extra dollar, you've got the question, do I pay off my mortgage to save myself 6.35% on what I've paid off, or do I put that dollar into something else, whether it's managed funds, shares, property, crypto, whatever we want to call it? So I guess the question then is, well, what is the return on these other investments? What is the certainty of that return? And what is the impact of inflation as well? Because we've got to balance these things. And can I re-access that money easily? When you're looking at a guaranteed return of 6.35%, guaranteed after tax saving, then that would be the equivalent of a guaranteed maybe 10%, I can't do the math in my head, but let's say a 10% return before tax, before fees and all of those things, which most investments, whilst they might perform at that rate over a long term, some might, very few of them perform at that rate on a guaranteed level. And so then you say, well, if I'm trying to get my money to work as hard as it can for as much certainty, which while you've got a mortgage, you need to be thinking more about the certainty of outcomes rather than the hopeful outcomes. We're not ready to diversify yet because you've got this mountain of debt that we need to get under control. And we do want to get that under control before we even kind of think about diversifying. And I think that's why some people lean to more property-based assets whilst they have a mortgage, because they can reuse the equity they've got in their home or on the property that they're paying off and still grow wealth. Now, once we're mortgage-free, it's game on for diversifying to your other assets. But we really want to ensure we get certainty of return kind of no matter what. And while interest rates remain high, it makes more sense in most instances to pay off that mortgage over investing in other types of assets, because it just won't work as hard. But when interest rates drop, and we're kind of on the precipice of rates starting to drop, we're going to move, I guess the equilibrium of that point is going to change. So you'll recall in COVID, when interest rates went down to 2%, why would you pay off a mortgage under those conditions when you could get a lot more investing in other types of assets? So the first question we ask is, what is the interest rate that you're paying, and can I get a guaranteed return for somewhere else? And if the answer is no, well, then you should be paying off your mortgage.
What are some of the biggest mistakes then you see that people make? Is it what we spoke about at the beginning, that they kind of think they're doing the right thing and they're flaying along, saving a bit, spending this, structuring the mortgage in a way that they think might work? Is it all a bit up to chance, or what do you see?
I think a lot of Kiwis are sleepwalking towards their retirement, and there's sort of this hope that it'll be okay. And they were brought up by parents or grandparents where it was okay. So you could see why they would make that conclusion, but for most of us that isn't going to be the case. And so then you say, well, what does it not being okay actually mean? Because no one's dying as a result of not having their retirement, but the impact of not having enough saved for your retirement, and KiwiSaver normally accounts for around 40% of what you are likely to need for retirement. So it's helpful, but it's not the silver bullet. It's better than no bullet, but it's not the silver bullet. I've got to work out what to do with the rest. So if you haven't been able to amass the rest of the money that you needed, then it just is going to mean, well, you're going to need to downsize your home earlier. You might need to work longer. You're unlikely to have the retirement you want or be able to help the kids as you expected. I don't think any of those things are literally the end of the world, but it is disappointing, I think, for many of us when we know that we have earned good income. So why is that our financial reality? But being prepared to confront that, especially when you have a partner who often is disengaged from finances. There's always one who's disengaged in the relationship. What I find is that when you hit around age 50, for at least one of you are very conscious of the fact, well, I've got 15 summers of income here that I need to maximise. And for many of us, knowing that we are going to maximise it still isn't going to be enough. So that's the brutal reality. The next question is, what do we do about it? And there is always something that can be done, hands down.
The other thing too, I suppose, is if you get a plan in place, if you do what you've just described, you probably have to review it reasonably often too, though.
Yes, I think, well, with my clients, I review it every 3 months because in my experience, you need milestones that need to be celebrated, absolutely. But you get this little bit of creep that comes in. And even if you only have a 1 degree kind of shift in how you spend, over the next 15 years, that is the difference between did we save enough or not. And that's... I'm conscious of that. People come to me for that accountability, and I'm tracking savings targets, spending targets. I want you to have a good life, so I'm not trying to prevent you spending, but once we've got the number that you have allocated to whatever you need to spend, then let's commit to it. And most importantly, I'm then tracking your mortgage coming down faster, the pace that we're getting building equity, and how quickly we're growing wealth in addition to paying off your mortgage. Well, I ran a half marathon on the weekend.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, well, that wasn't the reveal. But what was weird about this reveal is I wanted to do a particular time, and I accidentally deleted my app on my watch in the shoot before you start. I'm like, oh, this is crazy. So I was trying to work out how I was pacing. And the weird thing about this course is they didn't give you any milestones along the way. So they didn't give you, you've run 2Ks or 5Ks or whatever the case is. You only were told where you're at the halfway mark. And so I was just trying to get my bearings. I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel particularly good. And I could see a pacer up in front, and they had their number, how long they were going to take to run. And I thought, oh, they're running slower than what I was aiming for, but I can't even pass them because I'm like, this is terrible. And so what turned out is I ended up passing the pacer on this hill, and I said, well, can you tell me how far we've gone? And because my watch was saying 6Ks, and they're like, we've actually gone 9Ks. So then that completely changed things. And then I'm like, and what pace are you doing? And they're like, oh, we're not actually running at the pace that we said, we're running faster than our pace. And I'm thinking, you've got one job, literally, to stick to your pace. Why are you off? But how that relates to finances is, for many of us, we feel like we're caught in something and we're trying to get to the other end. And it is so hard to get to the other end when you don't know where you are relative to where you need to be, where you don't know the pace at which you're moving forward, to work out if you need to improve or slow down, because it all comes home to roost at some point. And I just thought, that's how many people must feel financially, or with any big goal, that they just don't even know. So when you don't know, you don't get to celebrate. When you don't know how to adjust. And for most of us, it's just small refinements made quickly that will be the difference between whether we keep that cadence going or whether we actually kind of burn out prematurely. And so it's hard, but I really believe structure, milestones, celebration, support, and quick adjustments are the key, often, to keeping your mindset strong, because I need your mindset in order to get through the curveballs.
Well said. Looking at it being sorted month and people actually perhaps taking the time now to do that, I suppose the idea is that they not just look at it, but actually take some action and then make that action stick.
Yes, and that's the hard part. And I think if we can create that structure of accountability, first telling you what's possible and then showing you how to hit it, I think that shifts a lot of people, but being there when it gets hard. Because anyone is good on a good day, but very few people are good on a bad day. And when it comes to finances, we tend to have more bad than good. At least that's how we rationalise our lack of progress.
Thanks for joining us today, Hannah. We could have talked for hours. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thanks everyone for tuning in. We're giving away 2 copies of Hannah's book, Kill Your Mortgage and Sort Your Retirement. You can find these details in the episode description. Great to have you watching and listening today to Shared Lunch. Until next time, ka kite anō.
Investing involves risk. You might lose the money you start with. We recommend talking to a licensed financial advisor. We also recommend reading product disclosure documents before deciding to invest.